to this special edition of the Lib Dem Podcast. I'm Lisa Smart, and I'm joined by four fabulous guests for this edition, this special edition of the Lib Dem Pod. Hannah, Kitching, tell us who you are and where you're from.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Hannah Kitching. I'm a councillor and the leader of the Lib Dems in Barnsley, among many other largely unpaid roles in the party at local, regional and national level.
Many congratulations, Hannah. Claire, this is your first starring appearance on the Lib Dem Pod. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. So I'm Claire Craven. I am an ex-Liberal Democrat councillor. I stood down a couple of years ago in Preston City Council. I'm currently a local party coordinator, and I'm also a general election agent, and every other job that we all do as well.
Alison, tell us about yourself.
Hi Lisa, my name's Alison Bennett. I am the parliamentary candidate for Mid Sussex, and I'm also the deputy leader of the district council here. And other voluntary things do cross my path from time to time too. And
we might bring this up as we continue with our conversation. Hannah Perkin, tell us about yourself.
Hello, thank you. So I'm Hannah Perkin. I am the parliamentary candidate for Faversham and Mid Kent for the next general election. I work for ALDC as a development officer for England, and I am leader of the Lib Democrats at Swale Borough Council in Kent.
Brilliant. And I'm Lisa Smart. I'm parliamentary candidate for Hazel Grove, councillor on Stockport Metropolitan Borough Council, and a shed load of other kind of voluntary and super exciting roles within the Liberal Democrats. We are going to talk about women in politics and women in the Lib Dems and what the current situation is, why it might be like that, and what we might all want to do about it. But first, an important public service announcement from Councillor Hannah Kitching.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so in prepping for this podcast, we're really mindful that in trying to talk about our experiences as women in politics, we cannot possibly talk for all the experiences of all the women in politics, because while we can and will lump all the men together into a big homogenous group, we know that within our party, within politics, both in the UK and globally, there's a huge sort of movement for women, particularly women from minority ethnic backgrounds, women of colour, women with disabilities, women from the LGBTQ plus community, to sort of get that representation through in politics. And we are who we all are, but we can't possibly speak for everyone. So if you listen to this and think, well, they're not speaking for me or my experience as a woman, that's absolutely fine, and feel free, to get in touch. So for me, I'm a parent, a mother. My kids are quite big now, to be honest, they're nearly teenagers. So that's very much changed my experience over the last few years. But I can sort of bring that element to it, which I know others on the call can too.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So before we get into it, I thought I'd give us some context as to where are we in terms of representation of women in UK politics. Well, let's start with the House of Commons. There are currently 225 women elected to the House of Commons, and that represents 35% of all MPs. So you might think, well, that's quite a low percentage, but it's actually the highest ever. So we've got the largest percentage of women in the House of Commons that we've ever had. We've had, of course, 3 women as our Prime Minister. I hope there will be more, because I think you look at the last one and think, we can try harder than that, we can do better than that. 30% of the current UK cabinet are women. Let's look a little bit now at some of the devolved administrations and some of the other assemblies that we've got. In the Senate, 43% are women. Scottish Parliament, 46% are women. Northern Ireland Assembly, 37% are women. You'll note they're all below 50%, but higher than the House of Commons. And one might think it's the Lib Dem Pod, so I think we legally must mention first past the post and PR. And we must think a little bit about how PR can affect that. London Assembly is quite interesting because there are several different elements. There is a proportional element to that, and 52% of Assembly members in London are women. House of Lords is, as you would imagine, for all the reasons you would expect, is pretty woeful. Only 29% of peers are women. Thinking about councillors, though, so in that more local representation, 41% of English councillors are women, 36% of Welsh, 35% of Scottish, and 26% of Northern Irish councillors are women. Claire, you were the inspiration behind this pod being recorded, us doing this episode. Tell us a little bit about why you thought it would be a really good idea.
Well, unfortunately, it was inspired by a rant, and I'm not proud to say the rant came from me. We were talking on our local Lib Dem WhatsApp group, of which I'm sure you're all members of 10,000 of those as well. And somebody said, how do we get more women involved in politics? How do we get women excited about it? And I went on probably a 7-message essay about what a horrible space it was in politics for women, or that had at least been my experience. So I was elected a few years ago. I stood for 4 years, was elected twice, thank you, all out. And then I stood down to go and have children and do all of that. And I found myself, as I sort of finished my rant, thinking, God, this is really depressing, because I basically said all the reasons why it's difficult, and I haven't said anything useful to the conversation about how we include women. And I was really racking my brains, well, how do we get more people, not just women, but more people who don't think to become councillors, become councillors? And so I suggested to John that he make a podcast episode about it. And because I'm a sucker, he said that I should do it. So,
that's a classic Lib Dem story. If you see there's a gap, something not being done, it's because you're not doing it.
100%, yes.
So why did you get involved in politics to begin with, Claire? What made you think, yeah, Lib Demery and local government, that's for me?
Well, it wasn't a penchant for masochism, although it sometimes feels like that. I got involved at university, and it was a freshers stall. I went in, I got sucked in. They were having a beer and pizza evening. I was all about that, and really enjoyed it throughout my time. So we campaigned with Charles Kennedy when he became rector, and he's probably the driving force, single most charismatic man I've ever met. I then sort of wandered away from it. Work happened, life happened, and when I moved down to Preston, I got really angry about Brexit, rejoined the party, and the next thing I knew, I was local party chair. So, yeah, a familiar story for us. And I think I stayed involved because of the community and the connection that we have around our local party friends, but also because you can't change an institution by standing at the gate and wagging your finger. And I feel compelled to do something. So here I am.
Yeah. Hannah Perkin, what got you involved in politics?
So it's a bit of a weird thing, because I never imagined I would do politics. It's not really something that I ever thought would be in my future. So it's bizarre to find myself here. I was running pubs for a long time and thought that was probably what I would do with the rest of my life. But when I had kids, I was using children's centres, the Sure Start centres in my town, and there was a push for them to be closed in 2013, I guess now, and I started going along to kind of the campaign meetings to try and save these children's centres, and went to a couple of the county council meetings in Kent, and when they were discussing the children's centres, there was just nobody there that was using them at all. The councillors were largely all men, largely kind of over 70. They weren't using the service, so they knew the financial cost of it, but they didn't know the kind of social value of that service at all. And I was really shocked that they were able to be making these decisions with no one who uses them voicing their opinions in the room. So first of all, I kind of had a bit of a word with myself, and Claire just mentioned that you can't change things by kind of wagging your finger on the outside, and I thought, well, if I can't just moan about not like women not being in the room. I probably just need to roll my sleeves up and get involved with it. So I did, and I did lots of kind of community campaigning before I met the Liberal Democrats locally. And then it was probably just by being asked by one of the members of the local party to kind of get involved and do some leaflets, and then the next thing you know, you're kind of relatable Lib Dem experience where you're a parliamentary candidate and you're running the party in like 3 years. But yeah, it was really being told that I could make a difference and encouraged to make a difference, and then asked to be a candidate. That's kind of where my story came from.
That might be a theme we return to, being asked and then maybe doing some asking. Alison, tell us about your experience. What got you involved to begin with?
So there's a book, one of the books that Jess Phillips has written, called The Life of an MP. And at the beginning of that book, she talks about why she chose to become an MP. And she says basically there's different answers to that question that she gives, but all of those answers are equally valid. And I feel a little bit like that too. One of my answers to that question would be that in the run up to the general election of 2015, there were locals and a general that day, as many Liberal Democrats may recall. There were a few, not many, a few leaflets came through my letterbox, and they sat on my kitchen worktop. And one day I looked at them and I realised that all the photographs on my kitchen worktop were of more mature white men. And I took a picture of it and put it on my Facebook page and said, oh, there's no diversity here. And then that sort of lingered in my brain. And then the results of the general election came out, and the district council that I'm now deputy leader of was 54 out of 54 Conservatives. And I thought, crikey, I'm not sure I want to bring my children up in a village where UKIP are coming second to the Conservative Party. And I thought, well, there's no point just taking the picture and putting it on Facebook. That doesn't actually do anything. Oh, I'll join the Liberal Democrats, I thought. And that was how it began.
Hannah Kitching, how did you get to where you are now?
So I joined after the result of the Brexit referendum, because I'm bringing my children up in Barnsley, and I watched I didn't really know that politics was something you could do, so I had loads of opinions on politics, but I didn't know it was something that people actually did. I've sort of lived in a selection of places that have either been safe Tory places or safe Labour places. So while I've always voted Lib Dem, if there was a Lib Dem on the ballot paper, it's been sort of a bit futile, really, and just my sort of own little protest vote. But after the Brexit referendum result, which is something I felt very passionately about and assumed everyone else felt the same, I don't know if anyone saw the Channel 4 news report in Barnsley town centre, where there was this bloke who basically said, oh yeah, well, we need to get all the P words out of town, don't we? And I was like, there are no people of Pakistani Muslim heritage in Barnsley. You're very, very few. I was like, this is not a world that I want to bring my kids up in. I was already very aware, as being someone from Leicester, that I was raising my children in a deeply undiverse part of the country, and was now like in really clear focus that I was raising my children in a really undiverse, really prejudiced part of the country as well. And on the television, David Cameron was like, right, yeah, great, crack on with it then, I resign. Jeremy Corbyn was going, yeah, this is a really good idea, let's come out of Europe as soon as we possibly can. And it was just Tim Farron, bless his heart, who was saying exactly what I felt about the Brexit referendum result. I don't have this opportunity to tell this story very often, to be honest, because, you know, I campaign in Barnsley. So that's why I joined. And then, similar to everyone else, sort of got contacted by the local Lib Dems who were like, oh, look, a new and enthusiastic member. Let's set them to work. And before I knew it, I was on the local party executive. I was campaign managing a local by-election. I was campaigning in Sheffield Hallam in 2017 with Nick Clegg. And I was on the sharp end of a plan to get councillors elected in Barnsley for the first time in a decade. And it just sort of spiralled from there, really, to be honest.
And Hannah Kate, do you think you've been treated differently from a man by virtue of being a woman who has been involved in politics?
I would say as a Liberal Democrat, no. I appreciate that might not be some people's experience, but I generally find that, sort of awesome, enthusiastic women are embraced and celebrated within the party. I suspect they are as well, to be honest, in other parties, but that's always very much been my experience. In terms of and with the general public, I don't know, really. There's a fair bit of sort of, do you think you can cope with them all in the town hall? Yes, I think I can, thank you. I think I'll be fine. But that's sort of well-meaning. There is an absolutely astonishing amount of sort of fairly idle, everyday misogyny from some of those older white men on Barnsley Council, both in my group as well as not in my group, I have to say. And I find parish councils in particular, it's not necessarily that I've got a really thick skin, Lisa, so I find it hard to necessarily tell if I'm being treated differently, but there are comments made, sometimes directly to me and sometimes sort of, within council meetings, that I think it is 2024, you really should not be saying that, and someone needs to pull you up on that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of like everyday misogyny goes on.
So there's definitely lots of that, and just some language choices, I think, across society, and I don't think politics is any different. So just using language like bossy, people never describe blokes as bossy, do they? My little anecdote before I bring Alison in is when I was standing for selection, so I'm a parliamentary candidate, first time I stood for selection, one of our members, who was a woman, asked me, well, dear, are you married? Do you plan on getting married? And do you have children? Because obviously if you had children, you wouldn't be able to do the job. This was even, well, dismaying, obviously, but also hilarious, because our sitting MP had 5 children, Andrew Stunnell, and so he was entirely able to do the job with 5 children, but obviously if I had one, it would be completely impossible for me to do the job. Alison, tell us about your experience and about if you think you've been treated differently, or your experience of being a woman in the politics.
Okay, so I would say on some things, actually, my local Liberal Democrats have been amazing and very accommodating and flexible, not just of me, but a few years ago, there were a group of us on our exec who were about my age, sort of in their 40s, youngish families, and we fitted the time of our execs around kids' bedtime. So actually the meeting started quite late at 8, but actually it meant that everybody had had a chance to do bedtime and get their children in bed. So broadly, actually, it's been really good, and we've got a great team here. That's not to say I've not sat in meetings where people have said that it's an embarrassment that the Liberal Democrat MPs are mostly women. And that was a bit of a low point, I have to say. But that person was spoken to. Then you come on to what it's actually like once you get elected as a district councillor. And here, I don't know what is the fact that I'm a woman and what is the fact that I'm, in inverted commas, a young woman. Now, I'm not a young woman, I'm 46 years old. But one of the real upsides of joining the Liberal Democrats in my late 30s was that it meant that suddenly I was the youngest person in every meeting, rather than having this crisis that I was about to turn 30 and I was now really, really old. Anyway, by virtue of being so young, getting elected, I think when I was about 41 or something, I got elected to the council, and the sort of, I think, microaggressions, or I think Hannah might have worded it better than me, the microaggressions that came out was like, well, young lady over there, have you got a question? And at the end of a committee, I hope that wasn't too boring for you, Alison. Now, is that because I'm a woman, or is it because I'm young, or is it because I'm just different to the person in question? I don't know. But yeah, there nothing horrific, but sort of little minor things like that.
Hannah, what about your experience?
Yeah, so same. I think within my local party, I think I've been treated fairly fairly the same as everybody else, really. The only thing that is slightly different, really, is that so I am also a very tall woman, so I'm 6'3", and sometimes people can get a bit funny about where I stand in a photograph. So, as an example, I've got colleagues who will stand up on a pavement while I'm down on the road, and I just don't think that they'd be concerned about the height of another man. Like, I just don't think that would be a thing. And then there's the kind of the everyday stuff that happens. When I first joined Swellborough Council, I was there on my very first day, and I was elected when I was 35. So as Alison said, you know, being one of the younger people that was elected that year. And I had trousers on, but again, this is a tall problem. So I had trousers on, but my ankles were out because you can't buy trousers long enough for me. And one of the chaps turned around to me and said, "Oh, you can't have your ankles out here." And I was like, okay, well, and then he said it wouldn't be like this in the old days. So I was like, oh no, I wouldn't have been here in the old days, would I, Brian? Because I wouldn't have been elected. But like, there's been lots of very odd little comments like that. It's also interesting to hear. So I sit in front of the Conservative Party. There are members of the Conservative Party at my council who are lovely, and there are members of the council who are not. And it's interesting to hear the chuntering and the chattering when women stand up and speak, and that doesn't happen when men stand up and speak at the council. And it's become very obvious to me over the last kind of 6 months of listening to what they're saying, that they wouldn't be directing those comments towards men at all. So I think that my experience has been one of huge support and embracement by some people, and slightly spiky, not liking the competition from others, whether it's to do with being a woman or whether it's to do with just being ambitious, I think is a question, but I think it might be a combination of the two.
We need more ambitious people in the Liberal Democrats. Yeah, I'd agree. Claire, in talking about your experience, you mentioned that you had stood down from Preston City Council for a little while to go and have family. I just wonder if you could tell us a bit about that experience. And I'm trying to think of an example of a man who did a similar thing when he was becoming a parent, and I can't think of one. I'm sure there are some, but I can't think of one. But tell us about your experience, because we're not just talking about being a woman, we're talking about being a parent as well, and being a mother specifically. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I can't think of a man that I know that has done that either, to be honest. So I was working a corporate job. It was one of those jobs where it was sort of 60 hours a week, always on call, that kind of job. And I was doing all the council stuff, and it was in the middle of the pandemic. So my children are very young. I have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old because I'm quite mad. And something had to give, and local politics was what gave. And I've got absolutely no shame in telling you that what has now given is I've binned off the corporate job and I'm eking out the pennies, eating beans on toast, so that I can do the family and the Lib Dem thing. So I'm a big believer that women can have it all. We can't have it all at the same time in any meaningful way. You have to pick and choose, otherwise you're doing... there's just only so many hours in the day, and I'm sorry if that bursts anyone's bubble that thinks that you can have it all. That's certainly not been my experience. So yeah, I chose to stand down when my term was up. I just didn't stand again, and I'm now in a position where I'm looking to get back into it. I still have very young children, and I still have the challenges that I'm sure some of you will be able to empathise with. You mentioned earlier that meetings needed to be rescheduled, Alison, around times that suited the people who had families. That's an issue I have. Even getting to an exec meeting is difficult. But on the flip side of that, it's all the more important now that I do it, because I don't want my kids growing up in a town where there's no leisure facilities, there's no arts facilities, there's, you can't drive your car safely because the roads are in such a shambles, or if they become sick, the healthcare provision has gone down so much. So I'm even more angry and energised, except I'm knackered and have no time.
Hannah Kitching, I know you and I have talked about organising canvassing sessions at a time that works for you. Tell us your experience. You're a mum, you're a councillor. How do you have it all?
Yeah, so I don't think that women can have it all. Some women might be able to have it all. I can't have it all, but that has considerably, I think, more to do with my ADHD than my gender. In that I am better when I'm doing fewer things at once, so that I can, really fixate on those few things and do an excellent job of them, rather than spreading myself too thin. And yeah, I mean, when to do things is a massive challenge. Barnsley Council is an entirely daytime council, so all the meetings are in daytime hours, which is very difficult for members of my group, guys actually, but who have full-time actual full-time jobs, proper jobs that pay them proper money, and therefore struggle to get to daytime meetings. I'm not sure that I personally would want to be on a council that was all evening meetings, because the thought of doing a big full-time proper job all day and then spending every single evening in council meetings, to me just feels like a different kind of unpleasant and unworkable. But yeah, as Lisa said, the thing that's really stumped me over the years, and it is getting better now as my kids are bigger, is that tea time canvas session. So you can sort of cram as much in as you can during the school hours, short as they are. And then at some point, either they go to bed or someone else takes over and puts them to bed. But there was always this slot of time between sort of 3:30 and 6:30 when my husband, wasn't home from work, and my children had gymnastics and ballet and brownies and taekwondo and after school club and all this whole host of things. And for, the general wisdom is the best time to go door knocking is, sort of tea time, isn't it? Sort of like 4 till 6 p.m. Just my absolute worst time of day, because you've got these either kids with activities or, someone needs to feed these children. And it's flipped a bit now. So they don't need picking up from school. They're perfectly capable of getting themselves home from school. So that's nice. And none of their activities start before sort of 6 o'clock. But they need feeding. And, they can feed themselves, in that they can make themselves a pot noodle, or they can make themselves some toast, or they can make themselves some chicken nuggets. And they will do a lot of that in the 6-week run up to the election. But if someone's inviting me to a 5 p.m. canvas session in, July or November or January, I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to feed my kids instead, because they're not going to have to, I'm not going to make them fend for themselves all year round. So, yeah, so I go door knocking like midday, 1 o'clock, 10 a.m., 3 p.m. And you don't catch everyone in, but you don't catch everyone in at 5 o'clock either. So yeah, that was the best advice I ever got, really. If you can't go door knocking at tea time, just go door knocking at a different time of day.
And I think that's a really good point, because great doesn't look the same for everybody. So yes, you do need to be active, but what does active look like? So if you might be somebody for whom delivering thousands and thousands of leaflets, that's absolutely your happy place, and that's great. It might also be that for whatever reason, it's just not possible for you to deliver thousands and thousands of leaflets. That's fine, but you need somebody to do that. So your skill might be recruiting a team, might be asking people to do stuff, might be getting deliverers. Great. And you're phenomenal on the phone. But for whatever reason, you're not traipsing up and down steps to deliver leaflets, but the leaflets need to go out. It's about working out how you can deliver what's great for you. And it's not great. It doesn't look the same for everybody. There's not just one way we can do this. Anyone else want to talk about motherhood and some of the challenges that being politically active and a mum? Alison?
Yeah, I was going to talk about actually being a councillor and how that combines with motherhood. So as Hannah said, Barnsley's all daytime meetings. Here we've got a 3-tier system, but the county council and the district council have totally different meeting setups. The county's all daytime and the district is broadly all evening. And what I would suggest to anybody who's been asked to think about standing and they're like, can I fit it in? Can I not do it? Is have a look at the schedule of meetings that the council publishes on their website and see when their meetings are. So I've got a friend, stroke colleague called Kirsty, who's a West Sussex County Councillor. She was elected 2 years before me. And when she was trying to work out whether or not she could actually be a county councillor, she examined in detail the next year of meetings and came to the conclusion that she could fit that in. And for her, daytime meetings with a sort of hour's drive to Chichester and coming back worked really well for her around her kids. Roll on 2 years, and it was like, will you stand for the district, Alison, which is evening meetings? And I looked at, can I do 7 p.m. meetings? Well, yeah, I can actually. And, on these days when my other half's coming back from London, I can get a babysitter. Oh, is there a childcare policy? Will they pay for the babysitting? Yes, they will. So do your research. Don't just out of hand say, no, I can't fit it in, I've got children. Have a think about what the schedule of meetings is and what kind of compensation you get for things like childcare costs. And there are ways that potentially you can make it work for you.
Yeah, really good point, Alison. And it's a dependent carer thing as well. So it's children, or if you're a carer for somebody at home and you need somebody to come and sit in. Different councils have got different policies also around parental leave. And so it's definitely worth looking at things like that, because it might be the right fit for you. It might not be, but go in fully armed with all the information that you have. I want to move now to thinking about, why do we need more women in politics? Some of you have talked about just having somebody around the room with some lived experience of using a children's centre, wanting to have some facilities in your local area for your children to pass on to. Help me out. Why do we need more women to get involved in politics?
Shall I come in on kind of a local government thing? So when I was first elected to Swale, we were in the bottom 3 in terms of gender representation. So there was 8 women out of 48 councillors, which is pretty shocking. And I did some kind of research into the amount of services that are used by women, and women overwhelmingly use council related services. And if women are not in the room when those things are being discussed, then you're really kind of missing out on your core service users. So first of all, it doesn't really make any sense in a business model. You wouldn't run a service, you wouldn't run a business for like a target audience that just is not there in the discussion about how that works. But secondly, I think that there's just a need for women to be able to feed into any kind of discussion about things that impact our communities, and they're just quite often not. So like everything that we can be doing to encourage people to kind of step into those roles is really positive. So yeah, I think it's just the fact that most local government services are used by women that is the most important thing to get women into local government, especially.
And okay.
For me, I think it's about showing women that they can.
Yeah.
And the more, for as long as politics stays, looks like a game for old white men, it will stay being a game for old white men, because, just to use a sort of a massive, sweeping generalization, we do know that, whether it's jobs or, or opportunities like this in politics, if you have an opportunity, you will get dozens and dozens of mediocre men put their name forward for that opportunity, because they'll think, oh yes, I can do that, yay me. And you'll get really, really awesome women who'll come up with 1,000 reasons why they probably can't quite squeeze it in at the moment. And I know that is a massive generalization, but I think, there's a decent sort of amount of work and research across industry and politics that sort of backs that up. And if women who have opinions and have experience of using services and, who are there day to day, sitting around their kitchen tables, expressing their opinions, but not knowing how to do anything about them. I think it's that kind of, modelling, isn't it? It's like women in sport, isn't it? All the girls that see the Women's Football World Cup on the telly, it makes them believe that they could one day play football for England. And so it's about that, kind of sort of seeing it, I think. I do just want to just say as well quickly before someone else comes in, I think that some of those numbers that you sort of mentioned at the top, Lisa, are to some extent swelled because the Labour Party in particular are extremely good at getting women elected. So whereas I think you've got sort of conservative councils like Hannah describes with absolutely atrocious gender representation, really overwhelmingly male, there's always been pretty much a 50-50, well, not always, but, in recent years, that there is a sort of pretty much 50-50 split of women and men on sort of councils like Barnsley, which are Labour councils. And I think you have to remember that, like the Labour Party has an awful lot of very, very, very safe seats. So, I always look at Stella Creasy, who's like the Labour MP for Walthamstow, who, she's done some absolutely brilliant work on abortion rights in Northern Ireland. She's worked really, really hard on, kind of like maternity and parental leave rights for MPs. And good for her but also it's really easy for her to do that because she is in an absolutely rock solid safe seat, and there is absolutely no danger at all of her not getting re-elected. And I think for us as Lib Dems, when we're asking women to stand as parliamentary candidates or as council candidates, it's not, for me, the work isn't doing the job that you get elected to. Lisa, if with the following wind you end up being the MP for Hazel Grove, the work you do as an MP in Parliament for your constituents will be the easy part of the job. The struggle is getting elected as a Lib Dem and then staying elected. Every single one of our elected representatives faces that. And so, I think we are as a party asking more of our candidates, and particularly our female candidates, than for example the Labour Party, who can tick those gender balance boxes in a relatively easy way by asking little of their candidates. That was a rant, sorry.
Claire.
I live for the rants, I really do. I enjoy them very much. I just wanted to very briefly revisit what I said earlier about women not being able to have it all. And I think the reason, some people might go, how dare you, of course you can have it all. Men aren't expected to have it all. And the thing of women having it all rather, is kind of an unfair expectation, because when you are elected to Parliament or take some other fabulous, glamorous job, you are not then expected to be everything else in your life as well. There are things in place to help support you. And so many of you have said that there are things in place in terms of childcare support to get to council meetings and things like that. Do you know what? I wasn't even aware that some of that stuff was in place. And I wonder how recently that's come in place. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important that we get more women into politics, because it's only by having women in politics who have those needs that those policies are then going to be enacted, because they sure as hell probably weren't enacted by the men who didn't have those requirements just in case somebody ever needed them. It's because the first women got into those positions and said, look, this is what I need, and fought for it to happen. So there's my angry rant. More women in politics to pave the way for more women in politics.
And I think it's at every level, isn't it? We've seen from some of the pandemic evidence that came out in the pandemic inquiry about the actual impact it had, having no women around the table in various meetings, and some of the really, really shoddy decision making that happened that just completely didn't think about the fact that PPE didn't fit lots of women's faces, or some of the decisions about closing and opening schools and childcare and bubbles and all of that stuff just wasn't coming from an informed place of people who ever had to think about, well, who's looking after my children today? I think that's all fair. One point, Hannah made a point about role models and about representation and people being able to see people who look like them doing things. And I very much remember going and doing a careers day at primary school where I was a school governor. And I was there doing politics. I was, the person talking about politics. And I remember Tabitha coming up to talk to me. And it was the morning that Theresa May had gone to see Nicola Sturgeon, so up in Edinburgh. So Theresa May was Prime Minister, Nicola Sturgeon First Minister of Scotland. And so that morning on the breakfast news, there'd been two powerful women leading their parties and their administrations. And so Tabitha just assumed, well, that's what women do. We run stuff. We're really senior politicians. We're prime ministers. We're first ministers. That's what we do. And so she'd taken the decision that she had decided that she was going to be prime minister. And so what did she need to do? That. And I think it was quite a fun little story, but it really matters. It's super important for kids growing up and not thinking everybody who's a politician is a bloke who looks quite similar, wearing the really slightly ill-fitting suit. Hannah Perkin.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a little anecdote on that from myself, because yesterday I basically had one of the best days I think I've ever had it as a local politician. A couple of years ago, we found out that there was quite a famous witch trial that took place in my town, and 3 women were hung for being witches, and 2 young girls had gone to the museum in town this week and had written to the mayor and said, oh, we found out about these women, but there's nothing in the town to talk about the history of that situation or to kind of say their stories. And then we were able to write back to them and say, actually, we've been working on this kind of commemorative stone that we're going to have put in, and it just so happened we were having that laid for International Women's Day yesterday. So it was really lovely for those. And those 2 young girls, Isla and Ava, big shout out to them. They came over and unveiled the stone, so they pulled the carpet back, and they were just really cute because they came over and said, we hadn't really thought that we could change things by speaking to local government and getting things that we wanted done. And it was just a really heartwarming kind of interconnection with women from the past who were treated really badly. Myself as a woman in local government and 2 young girls that are the kind of future of the town. So it was just a really wholesome, all-round kind of role model day. It was lovely.
Oh, that's great, Hannah. I saw that on your social media feed yesterday, and I was like, there's a good story there. The thing that popped into my head just as we were talking then was a story my dad will still repeat back to me, which is that when Margaret Thatcher, shout out for Thatcher, ceased to be Prime Minister when I was fairly young, probably a young teenager, I think, I couldn't get my head around the fact that the Prime Minister was now male. It just was weird and wrong. And all I could remember in my life was the Prime Minister being a woman. And that is just, what a Prime Minister is. And the other thing that I was thinking about, so I went to a college at university, which is one of the first all-women colleges at Cambridge, Newnham College. And in the late 19th century, it did an incredible job of enabling women to get degrees at Cambridge. And it's still single-sex today. But you'd go into the library in the college and there was a roll of honour that was in a glass case, and every week or 2 they'd turn over a page of this roll of honour and there would be a kind of little short biography of somebody who'd been to Newnham. And there were these incredible women who'd gone and done physics degrees and PhDs and research. And then more often than not, they then ended up going and becoming teachers at girls' schools and teaching more girls about physics or chemistry or English or whatever it was. And then maybe those girls would then go and get degrees, but then maybe they would become teachers too. Teachers are amazing. Lots of my friends are teachers. But I remember looking at that roll of honour each week and thinking, what's the point of this education? What's the point of this education? Just to pass on more education. That's not the path I want for me. I want to do something else. And so that, coming back to the point about role modelling, is one of the reasons that I wanted to be in politics.
So we're going to finish by talking about how we get more women involved. So what can we do? What have we done? What do we do? And it's hope everybody listening to this agrees that it's not just women's jobs to get more women in politics, it's all of us. And all sorts of women, particularly women who are from underrepresented groups. Claire made the really good point that if you're thinking about standing, you need to look at things like dependent carers policies. You need to look at what time the meetings are taking place, work out if it works for you. The thing I'd say on that as well is when you get elected, you get to decide when the meetings happen. So it's a decision of full council. If you think this is a really inconvenient time, persuade your colleagues, it goes to a vote, change it. That's how politics works. Get elected, change stuff. What can we do to get more women elected? Who wants to come in? Claire, go for it.
I think one of the easy wins is that we sort of make the assumption as Lib Dems that everyone else is as into politics as we are, and actually we're the weirdos, and not everyone else is into the nitty gritty of how their local council works. And there's an assumption amongst a lot of people that when I tell anyone that I'm involved in local politics, they go, "Oh, you're going to be an MP, are you?" Because they think it's like a Sims career path where you start at the bottom, but your target is to be an MP. And that is not the case. There are so many different roles in local politics. You don't even have to stand as a candidate if that puts the fear of God into you. You can do so many other things, but people don't know that those things exist. And we often find with new campaigners, delivering a few leaflets is kind of the gateway drug, and then we suck you in and put you on the exec. If we can get more people knowledgeable about the base starter level, then we will get more people who catch the bug and keep going into it, I think. And that applies for everyone, not just women.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is about asking women to stand, which I know is, again, a bit of a cliche, but I remember listening to Dorothy Thornhill, who, as people know, was the elected mayor of Watford for a while. And I think she was I can't remember if she was before she was elected as a councillor, she was doing the thing, she was delivering leaflets, she had small kids, and she was at some sort of meeting where there was a conversation about who was going to stand as the candidate, in whatever ward she was in. And she sat there through this meeting going, I think I could do that. I think I could do that. Why has no one asked me? Is that because they don't think that I could do that? I don't think we really think of Dorothy Thornhill as being someone who's sort of shy about putting herself forwards. But apparently at one point she was. And I get really frustrated when I sort of say to my colleagues, have you asked such a person? Oh no, she won't have time to do it. Have you asked such a person? Oh no, I don't think she'd want to do it. Well, have you actually asked her, or are you literally just have you just decided, for them? And so ask. And I also think as well, yes, the schedule of council meetings is important, but there is much, much more to being a councillor than attending council meetings. Okay, fine, yeah, if you won the council and you're on the cabinet, then yeah, you probably do need to turn up. But my councillors are minority opposition group councillors, and I genuinely don't care whether they go to every single full council meeting or whether they go to one full council meeting a year, because if it doesn't work, if people have only got a finite number of hours in the week, which we all have, why would you spend those hours in the town hall, in council meetings and committee meetings, where with the best will in the world, as an opposition group councillor, you're not actually getting anything done. Yeah, fine, get to some of the meetings, but what's far, far more important is that you're out there in your community, campaigning, knocking on doors, delivering your leaflets, getting involved in community groups, just like doing the work of being a visible local councillor. Too many people think that being a councillor is turning up to council meetings, and for me that is it's actually the least important part of the whole thing.
Sorry, before Alison comes in defence, where we're running stuff and it's in no overall control, some of us do need to turn up on occasion for the odd meeting, Hannah. Yeah. So while I completely take your point,
I agree. If you're running stuff, yeah, please do turn up and run your actual council. But that's a different ask, isn't it? Do you want to come and run this council? Is a is a different ask to, you know, do you want to come and make Barnsley Labour's life a misery on a daily basis?
So to somebody who is running a council, Alison.
Well, what I was going to say, Hannah, is that I think you have to ask people what it is that's putting them off doing it. And one of the things that comes up is the idea that it's very confrontational and it's all about making Barnsley Labour's life a living misery, because I don't think it has to be. Yeah, I actively try to avoid getting into arguments with people. I don't particularly like arguing. Canvassing is not about having a row on a doorstep with somebody who you've bothered on a Saturday afternoon. It's about listening, isn't it? And it's about prompting people and seeing what they tell you. And I always think that that's an enormous privilege, actually, that people will share things with you about their lives, about their concerns that otherwise you'd never have any insight into. So it's not confrontational necessarily. It can be fun. I think elections and campaigning are fun and I really love it and I really enjoy it. I'd also say that as somebody who got involved when I'd been like looking after children for a few years and basically all my friends were mums about my age, what a privilege it's been to get to meet all sorts of people from all different walks of life, different ages, all sorts of people. And I just wouldn't have met them otherwise. I'd still be in my little kind of mum bubble of going to the school gate and things if I hadn't done what I've done. And the final point I was going to make, I think there's quite often a worry about public speaking. Oh, I couldn't be a councillor because I hate speaking in public. You know, you can be a very good councillor and never speak in a council meeting. And you can be a terrible councillor and always speak in a council meeting. So it's not about the public speaking. It is about looking after your residents and being there for your community.
For those who are listening rather than watching this edition of the podcast, the most vigorous nodding was reserved there for Alison, saying that you can speak a lot at councils and still be pretty useless. So yeah, absolutely, very firmly, yes.
Can I just come in on what Alison just said? I think there is loads of fun and like really interesting things to be had out of being a local councillor. There are some challenges as well, but I think it was as well about getting people involved in the things they're actually interested in and they want to actually like find out what they want to achieve out of their time as whether that be a campaigner or as a councillor or as an MP, going back to kind of find out what people's whys are and why have they got involved, what do they want to get out of it, and then encouraging them into that role can be really transformative for them, for their experience. Like I cannot bear being on the planning committee. I hate it. I absolutely can't bear it. And I can't bear being on policy and resources. It's just like the numbers and stuff is not me at all. But I really enjoy being on like the community side of it or the environmental discussions or going and visiting new people and going and like talking to my residents. So there are people in my group who really enjoy the numbers and really enjoy the kind of planning side of it. And so they're happier doing that and I'm happier out and talking to people, and working together as a team I think is really important for encouraging everybody to be involved with local politics, because there's lots of really cool things that you can do, but don't spend your time doing things you absolutely hate because it will just make your life miserable. And then on that point, just like making sure that you're able to say no to the stuff that you really hate. Like I found that really difficult for a long time, that like no is a full sentence sometimes, and that's fine, and you don't have to do everything for everybody. And that's been a learning curve for me, but also when someone is saying no to you, kind of respecting that no and going, okay, they don't want to do that and that's fine. So carving out where people want to be in their experience and then making that a reality, or helping them to make that reality is the best way of encouraging people into those kind of roles, I think.
Agreed on almost everything there. No means no. I think we've all been taught that many, many times. The one time I think it's worth remembering that it's no for now. So asking somebody to stand, it might be no, it's not right now, but it might be right in a year's time, 2 years' time, whatever. I remember having some training from Steve Hitchens, the late Steve Hitchens, who used to do beer councillor training, and he said all the best candidates say no the first 5 or 6 times you ask them, and I think that's pretty fair, and I've got experience of that in my local team. So we've hopefully been useful with this episode in giving people some tips about how to get more women involved locally. If you're a woman thinking about getting involved but not quite sure where to start, try stuff. If you don't like it, don't do it a second time. Really, there's loads of different ways of being an active Lib Dem. Some of them you don't need to leave your house, some of them you do. There's lots of different things to do. The brilliant thing about politics is you can change stuff. You get involved, you get around the table and you make stuff better. So ask people to stand. We will know when we've reached equality, when we've elected as many mediocre men and mediocre women. And I think there's still some distance to travel until there are as many mediocre women elected as there are mediocre men. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.